Let me describe a couple to you, and tell me if any of this sounds familiar. He's 36, she's 34. They've been married for 5 years. They live in a suburb of a mid-size American city, outside of Nashville, outside of Columbus, outside of Raleigh. Doesn't matter which one. The story works everywhere. He's an operations manager at a logistics company. She's a physical therapist at a regional hospital. He clears $82,000 a year. She clears $76,000. Combined, they're bringing in $158,000. That's top 15% of American households. By almost any measure, these are two people who figured it out. They both went to college. They both built real careers. They did the responsible thing and combined their finances when they got married. They bought a house in a neighborhood they felt good about, in a school district they could be proud of. They have a 3-year-old and they're thinking about a second. They both have 401ks. They have health insurance. They have life insurance. On paper, they have everything. And yet there's this low-grade, persistent stress that neither of them can quite explain. They have maybe $18,000 in savings, which sounds like a lot until you do the math and realize it's barely 3 months of their actual expenses. Last spring, when their HVAC system needed to be replaced, they put $7,400 on a credit card because writing a check that size felt terrifying. They've talked more than once about whether one of them should take a step back after their next baby. Maybe go part-time. Maybe take 6 months. Every time they run the numbers, it doesn't seem possible, and they move on. They're not reckless. They're not indulgent. They don't have a boat. They don't take expensive vacations. They're just two people who are working as hard as they've ever worked, bringing home more money than either of them ever imagined they'd make at 35, and quietly wondering why it feels like they can't get ahead. If you've ever looked at your household income and had that specific feeling, not panic, just confusion, the sense that the numbers should add up to more than they do, this video is going to put language to something you've probably only been able to feel. My name is Nico, and I spend way too much time thinking about why dual-income households, the ones that are doing everything the modern economic playbook told them to do, so often end up more financially fragile than single-income families from 50 years ago. If you're working alongside a partner, grinding through 2 full-time careers, and still feel like you're running to stand still, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you. Now let's get into it. Here's the thing. Most of us carry a belief we never really examine. 2 incomes are better than 1. It seems like math. It seems obvious. If one person making $50,000 can support a family, then 2 people each making $50,000 should be able to support that same family with $50,000 left over for savings, for wealth building, for actual financial breathing room. That's just arithmetic. But what actually happened over the past 50 years, in household after household across this country, is one of the most quietly devastating financial stories of our time. Having 2 incomes didn't give families more security. For millions of them, it made them more vulnerable, not less. The term for this is the 2-income trap. It was coined by Elizabeth Warren in 2003. Yes, that Elizabeth Warren, when she was a Harvard bankruptcy law professor, long before anyone thought of her as a politician. She and her daughter Amelia Warren Tyagi spent years studying thousands of families who had filed for bankruptcy and came back with a finding that genuinely surprised them. 2-income families were going bankrupt at higher rates than single-income families. Not slightly higher rates. Meaningfully higher rates. Let that sink in. Working twice as hard, bringing home 2 paychecks, doing everything the modern economy told you to do, and ending up more likely to lose everything, not less. That's not a personal finance failure. That's a trap. And if you're in a dual-income household right now, there's a real chance you're standing in the middle of it. To understand why, you have to go back, not a decade, further. In 1970, roughly 43% of women participated in the labor force. The typical middle-class family had one primary earner and one parent managing the household. And here's what most people either don't know or tend to wave away. That single income was actually enough. Not barely enough. Not scraping by enough. Structurally, functionally enough. According to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Historical Census Records, the median single-income family in 1970 could afford a median-priced home while spending about 25% of their annual income on the mortgage. That's within the healthy range that financial advisors still recommend today. They could put their kids in public schools that were, if not exceptional, adequately funded regardless of which neighborhood they lived in. They could afford basic health care without meaningful risk of financial ruin. They could maintain a car, feed a family, save something, and occasionally take the kids somewhere. They had margin, financial breathing room, the ability to absorb a shock without going into crisis mode. And critically, and this is the piece that gets overlooked almost every time this topic comes up, they had a reserve. If the primary earner lost their job, got sick, or couldn't work for any reason, the stay-at-home parent could enter the workforce. It wasn't anyone's first choice. It required adjustment. But it was there. That latent second income was an insurance policy. a financial backup lever that could be pulled if things went wrong. Now fast forward to today. Female workforce participation sits around 57% nationally, and considerably higher among married mothers with young children. In more than 60% of married households with children, both parents are working. The two-income household stopped being the exception and became the norm. We essentially took that emergency backup lever, the reserve income that was supposed to be protection against catastrophe, and made it part of the baseline operating budget. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because median household income has actually risen since 1970 in inflation-adjusted terms, we are technically earning more than our parents and grandparents were. So the obvious question is, if incomes went up, why does financial stress feel worse, not better? The answer is on the other side of the ledger. Median home prices in 1970, adjusted for today's dollars, were roughly $190,000 to $200,000. The median home price in 2024 is north of $420,000. Housing costs have more than doubled relative to inflation, not crept up, doubled. That is a structural shift, not a blip. Healthcare spending per household has increased by somewhere between 500 and 700% since 1970 in real terms. Health insurance premiums alone have outpaced general inflation in every decade since 1980. Childcare, which was not a significant budget line for the single-income household because someone was home, now costs the average American family somewhere around $12,000 to $15,000 per year per child. In major metro areas, you're looking at $20,000 to $30,000 per child annually. The average, not the extreme. And college costs have risen over 1,200% since 1980, adjusted for inflation. Public universities included. Notice what all of those categories have in common. Housing, healthcare, childcare, education. These are not discretionary expenses. They are not luxuries. They are the non-negotiable fixed costs of participating in the American middle class. And every single one of them has grown dramatically faster than wages. So what happened to the second income, the one that was supposed to provide the surplus, the cushion, the wealth-building capital? It got absorbed, every dollar, and then some. Now you might be thinking, Nico, we're careful. We're not blowing money on stupid stuff. That second income isn't just disappearing. And look, maybe you're right, but let me walk you through the math that most two-income households have never actually done, and I want you to be genuinely honest with yourself about whether this applies to your situation. Let's take a household. She makes $80,000. He makes $58,000. Combined, $138,000, which looks and feels like a solid number. Let's focus on what actually happens to that $58,000. First, taxes. And this is the one that surprises most couples when they really look at it. Because of the way progressive federal tax brackets work, the second income doesn't get taxed from the bottom of the bracket structure the way a standalone income would. It gets stacked on top of the first income and taxed at the household's highest marginal rate. That first $80,000 fills up the lower brackets. The additional $58,000 comes in at the top of the stack. When you factor in federal income tax, state income tax in most states, and payroll taxes, the effective marginal rate on that second income is often somewhere between 30 and 38%. Let's call it 33% to be conservative. Your $58,000 is now $38,860 in actual take-home pay. If this couple has one child in daycare, that's a conservative $14,000 to $16,000 annually. Let's call it $15,000. You're at $23,860. Two working parents means two people getting themselves to work every day. The second commute is a real cost. Fuel, vehicle wear, maintenance, parking. The full cost of a daily commute, including depreciation and time-related wear on the vehicle, is commonly estimated between $4,000 and $7,500 per year. If they needed a second car they wouldn't otherwise have, add the payment, insurance, and registration on top. Let's use $6,000 for the second earner's commuting costs, which is, if anything, conservative for someone driving to an office 5 days a week. You're at $17,860. Here's the one nobody puts in a spreadsheet. When both adults are working full-time, navigating two careers, doing pickup and drop-off, managing the mental load of two professional lives and one small child, something gives. That something is almost always cooking, cleaning, household maintenance, and the dozens of domestic tasks that a household requires to function. Studies consistently show that dual-income families spend several $100s more per month on convenience than comparable single-income households. More restaurant delivery, more takeout, more paid cleaning services, more prepared foods and pre-made meals because nobody has the energy to cook from scratch on a Tuesday night after a full workday plus a commute. Conservative estimates put this convenience premium at $600 to $900 a month. Call it $700. That's $8,400 a year. You're at $9,460. That is the real net annual contribution of a $58,000 second income after accounting for taxes, childcare, childcare, commuting, and the unavoidable cost of running two professional lives simultaneously. $9,460. And that's the optimistic version. That's one child, one commute, conservative daycare costs, and no unexpected expenses. If there are two children in care, if the commute is longer or parking is involved, if the area has above-average daycare costs, which most cities now do, those numbers can go negative. The second income can literally cost more to maintain than it generates. Someone is spending 40+ hours a week away from home. Missing mornings, missing dinners, arriving exhausted, carrying work stress that bleeds into evenings and weekends, and the household nets $9,460 for the year. That's $788 a month. That's about $26 a workday. I'm not saying this to argue that one partner should stop working. That's not the point I'm making. The point is, you should know the actual number, because almost no one does. Most families are making enormous life decisions: what house to buy, what city to live in, what lifestyle to sustain, based on the gross income number, without ever calculating what the second income actually nets. And that gap between the number you see and the number you actually keep is where the trap lives. And here's what really gets me about all of this. We talk about the two-income trap almost entirely in financial terms. But the costs aren't only financial. A dual-income household with young children is operating at, or very near, its maximum sustainable output most of the time. Both adults working full-time, managing the logistics of childcare and school pickups and meal planning and home maintenance, while also trying to maintain some version of a marriage and a relationship with their kids. That's not a lifestyle. That's a sprint that doesn't have a finish line. And the data on what that sustained pressure does to people is not encouraging. Burnout rates among dual-income parents are significantly higher than among single-income households. Divorce rates, which are expensive in every sense of the word, are correlated with financial stress. Sleep deprivation, which is nearly universal among working parents of young children, affects cognitive function, emotional regulation, and long-term health in ways that eventually show up in medical bills and lost productivity. These are costs. They don't appear on any household budget spreadsheet, but they are real and they compound. I'm not raising this to make anyone feel worse about their situation. I'm raising it because the conversation about dual-income households almost always stays inside the financial data and misses the part where two exhausted people are trying to run a household, raise children, maintain careers, and have some kind of life, and wondering, quietly, why the math never seems to add up to freedom. Here's the psychological layer that makes this so effective. Because the gross income looks good, $138,000 on the tax return looks like security. It looks like a number that should produce financial comfort. So families make decisions scaled to that number. They buy the house that $138,000 can qualify for with a lender, not the house that $80,000 alone could service. They take on two car payments that two incomes can technically support. They buy into the school district that requires a mortgage sized for two incomes to cover. The bank approved the mortgage based on combined income. The mortgage lender said yes because the math worked on paper. And technically it does work, as long as both incomes keep flowing without interruption. As long as neither partner gets laid off, or sick, or burned out past the point of functioning. As long as no one needs to step back for a child with health challenges, or an aging parent who needs care, or any of the 1,000 things that life tends to produce on its own schedule. This is where Elizabeth Warren's research really hit hardest. The single-income family of 1970 had a real backup. If the earner lost their job, there was a potential second income in the household that could be activated. Imperfect, maybe slow to ramp up, but real. That two-income family of today has no such backup. Both incomes are already fully committed to the monthly fixed costs. There is no reserve. If one income disappears, even temporarily, the household often cannot maintain its financial obligations. Not because they were reckless, because they built a life that requires both incomes to function. And life doesn't promise that both incomes will always be there. A Federal Reserve survey in recent years found that more than a third of American adults couldn't cover a $400 emergency expense from savings alone without borrowing or selling something. Many of those people are in dual-income households making solid money on paper. They're not broke because they don't earn enough. They're financially fragile because their expenses expanded to consume every dollar of their combined earnings, and they're one transmission repair, one layoff, one health scare away from genuine crisis. And the most painful part is that the expenses that consumed all of it weren't boats and vacations and luxury indulgences, at least not primarily. They were housing, childcare, healthcare, the fixed costs of just being a middle-class family. There's another mechanism driving this that I think about a lot, because it explains why the trap doesn't just affect individual families. It perpetuates itself across entire markets. When two-income families became the norm rather than the exception, they didn't just have more purchasing power in the abstract. They competed with that purchasing power for specific scarce things: houses in desirable neighborhoods, spots in quality childcare programs, access to well-funded public schools. And when a large portion of buyers suddenly have two incomes to offer, what happens to the price of those things? They get bid up. Because school funding in this country is largely tied to local property taxes, better schools exist in more expensive neighborhoods. Parents who want their children in those schools have to buy into those neighborhoods. And as two-income families started competing for housing in good school districts, they bid prices up to the level that two incomes could afford, which turned what started as a competitive advantage into a baseline requirement. You no longer need two incomes to get ahead. You need two incomes just to afford what one income used to buy. Warren calls this the bidding war for educational access, and it's exactly that. The price of entry to quality public schooling became a mortgage that requires two incomes to service. You're not writing a tuition check, but you're paying the tuition equivalent inside your housing costs, month after month, for 30 years. And once you're locked into that mortgage, you're locked into needing both incomes. You can't go back. You can't go down. The trap has closed. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Nico, I get it, but what am I supposed to do? I can't just have my partner quit their job. We need both incomes to pay our bills. And I hear you. That is the nature of the trap precisely. You need both incomes to sustain the life you built around having both incomes. But here's the mindset shift that changes everything. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying one person should stop working. I'm saying something different. I'm saying most families have the relationship between their income and their fixed costs backwards, and flipping it changes everything. The fatal move that most dual-income households make is calibrating their non-negotiable monthly expenses to their combined take-home, the mortgage, the car payments, the recurring financial commitments, all of it sized to what two incomes support, because two incomes feel stable, two incomes feel reliable, and they are reliable until they aren't. The alternative is what I think of as the one-income foundation. Your fixed costs, the things you have to pay every month regardless of what happens, are sized to what one income can realistically cover. The second income becomes something else entirely, not an income stream that's pre-committed to expenses, a discretionary capital stream. Savings, retirement accounts, debt payoff, investment. Every dollar of the second income goes toward building assets, not maintaining a lifestyle. The difference this makes is structural and enormous, because when your fixed costs run on one income, you have something most dual-income families have traded away without meaning to. Resilience, the ability to absorb a shock. If one partner loses their job, you tighten up and manage. If someone needs to step back for a year to handle a family situation, you're not losing the house. If the market takes a bad year, you're not in crisis, you have margin. Now, I understand this requires sacrifice in the short term, and I don't want to minimize that, because I think a lot of personal finance advice brushes past the real difficulty of what it means to make different choices than the people around you. It means driving past the houses you technically qualify for and buying a smaller one. It means staying in a school district that's good but not the absolute highest ranked in your area. It means not upgrading the cars when everyone around you seems to be upgrading theirs. It means explaining to friends why your lifestyle doesn't visibly match your income. That's genuinely uncomfortable, and the social pressure to spend like a dual-income household when you are one is real and constant. But here's what happens on the other side of that discomfort. Within 5 to 10 years of directing that second income into savings and investments rather than lifestyle, something shifts. The assets you've been building start generating their own returns. Compound interest does what it does. And gradually, the family's financial position stops depending entirely on both incomes flowing forever. The portfolio generates income. The emergency fund is real and substantial. Options that felt impossible start to become possible. A career change, a sabbatical, a parent stepping back, a business idea worth pursuing. The things that felt like sacrifices start to look like the decisions that bought back freedom. That is what financial security actually looks like. Not a high household income with no buffer. A life whose fixed costs fit inside one income, and an investment portfolio built from the other, quietly compounding towards something real. I want to leave you with one final thought, because I think it reframes this entire conversation. The two-income trap isn't really a story about income, it's a story about flexibility, about margin, about what happens to a household's ability to absorb ordinary uncertainty when both of its financial buffers have been converted into monthly obligations. The single-income families of 50 years ago had something we've quietly traded away. Not higher incomes, not better stock picks. They had the ability to bend without breaking, to absorb a hit, to have one partner stop working if life required it, without the whole financial structure collapsing overnight. They had a backup plan that had never been spent. The difference this makes is structural and enormous, because when your fixed costs run on one income, you have something most dual-income families have traded away without meaning to. Resilience, the ability to absorb a shock. If one partner loses their job, you tighten up and manage. If someone needs to step back for a year to handle a family situation, you're not losing the house. If the market takes a bad year, you're not in crisis, you have margin. Now, I understand this requires sacrifice in the short term. And I don't want to minimize that, because I think a lot of personal finance advice brushes past the real difficulty of what it means to make different choices than the people around you. It means driving past the houses you technically qualify for and buying a smaller one. It means staying in a school district that's good but not the absolute highest ranked in your area. It means not upgrading the cars when everyone around you seems to be upgrading theirs. It means explaining to friends why your lifestyle doesn't visibly match your income. That's genuinely uncomfortable, and the social pressure to spend like a dual-income household when you are one is real and constant. But here's what happens on the other side of that discomfort. Within 5 to 10 years of directing that second income into savings and investments rather than lifestyle, something shifts. The assets you've been building start generating their own returns. Compound interest does what it does. And gradually, the family's financial position stops depending entirely on both incomes flowing forever. The portfolio generates income. The emergency fund is real and substantial. Options that felt impossible start to become possible. A career change, a sabbatical, a parent stepping back, a business idea worth pursuing. The things that felt like sacrifices start to look like the decisions that bought back freedom. That is what financial security actually looks like. Not a high household income with no buffer. A life whose fixed costs fit inside one income, and an investment portfolio built from the other, quietly compounding towards something real. I want to leave you with one final thought, because I think it reframes this entire conversation. The two-income trap isn't really a story about income, it's a story about flexibility, about margin, about what happens to a household's ability to absorb ordinary uncertainty when both of its financial buffers have been converted into monthly obligations. The single-income families of 50 years ago had something we've quietly traded away. Not higher incomes, not better stock picks. They had the ability to bend without breaking, to absorb a hit, to have one partner stop working if life required it, without the whole financial structure collapsing overnight. They had a backup plan that had never been spent.